Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and get started here. First thing we're going to talk about is this evening is going to be mostly about CPUs. This is going to be different from the previous live streams that I've been doing recently where they're all mostly focused on GPUs. So this evening we're going to be looking at CPUs because we did have a new CPU launch this week, that being Intel's 14th generation processors. And we also had an announcement for AMD's Threadripper, Zen 4 based Threadripper, which is the return of HEDT, because Threadripper has been restricted to the workstation market for a long time now. Basically, with the Threadripper 5000, if you weren't aware, there are no consumer grade Threadrippers. For Zen 3, there was only Threadripper Pro. So with this new announcement, there's Threadripper Pro Zen 4, but there's also Threadripper Non-Pro, which is actually high-end desktop in its true form. So if you're interested in that, stay tuned because we are going to cover that pretty in-depth later on the stream. But for the start, we're going to look at Intel's 14th generation because that is kind of the headlines for the main consumer desktop release this week. So good evening, everybody. Hey, RK, good evening. We're going to go ahead and get on started. We're going to just start real quick here. Just jump right in to Intel's 14th generation. So this is actually the 13th generation, rebranded as a kind of an incremental upgrade. So it's kind of a strange launch. It's somewhat similar to the Kaby Lake. So if you guys remember Intel's 7th generation, it was basically Skylake with a slight clock speed boost, and it was the same node. So this is very similar to that. The only difference is when Intel did the 7th generation, they changed the name. So 6th gen was Skylake. So that was like an i7 6700K. Then they launched Kaby Lake, which was the 7700K. But they changed the name, even though architecturally it was the same thing. This time around, they didn't actually change the name. So it's still Raptor Lake at its core. And it's kind of underwhelming. I mean, I was looking at some of the reviews yesterday. Obviously, I didn't get any review samples, so I didn't review these CPUs. But I don't think I'm really missing out on anything, to be honest. The only thing that I'm interested in is the memory performance, because I have been wanting to be able to run 4 sticks of memory in a DDR5 based motherboard for a long time now at speeds other than the standard JEDEC speeds. And what I have found is it's not really possible to go beyond 4800 to 5200. That's kind of the maximum. So the thing that's disappointing in all these reviews that I've looked at, not a single one of them. Now, the WCCF Tech article mentions support for faster DDR5 memory DIMMs. But when you look into that, all it talks about is 8,000 whatever on 2 sticks. That is utterly useless. That doesn't tell me anything, or that's not actually what I'm interested in knowing about. Nobody tested this with 4 sticks of memory. So it's almost like I'm going to have to go and buy one of these myself to figure out if I can actually run 128 gigabytes of memory at 5600 megahertz 100% stable, because I am not able to do that with the 13900K. So that is something that I'll point out, because I got a lot of questions on the video that I did for 128 gigabytes, everything you need to know. I probably should rename that video because I think that's a better name for the video. But basically, there was a ton of people leaving comments like, well, does 4 sticks of memory work? Does 4 sticks of 64 gigs work? Does, what about 6,000 megahertz? Yeah, and clearly they didn't watch the conclusion of the video. Those sort of comments tell me that people didn't really watch the full video. It's not going to perform any differently. Yeah, but the thing is, can it actually do the memory, though? Like, did they actually put any effort into tuning the memory controller or improving the memory controller in any way? Or is this literally just somebody went in here and they photoshopped the 3, they deleted the 3, they basically took the eraser in Paint, erased the 3, and wrote a 4 here, and called it a day. Because if that's all they did, then this is going to be the worst way to retire the iconic Intel Core i naming. Because after this CPU, Intel will no longer brand their CPUs Core i5, i7, i9. They're basically going to change the name to Intel Core 5 Ultra or something like that. Like, they're getting rid of the letter I. I guess it's because they don't want to look like they're copying Apple for some reason. I just think it's kind of a dumb reason to get rid of the I. I don't know why they need to get rid of the I. I actually like the branding for the Intel Core i. I like the branding. It's like, I don't know why they need to change it, but I guess they think it's stale. They don't want to keep on inflating the numbers, maybe. This is just a stopgap CPU. Yeah, but it's the worst way to end the iconic branding, in my mind. All they did was delete the 3 and put a 4 on there and call it a day. That's pretty bad, to be honest, if that's all it is. Because the top-end SKU, the 14900K, literally is a 13900KS. Like, that's literally all it is. Like, in fact, in some of the reviews that I looked at one review from Paul's Hardware, and he actually showed that in some of these, like this, see, like in Corona, they're exactly the same. They're literally exactly the same. And here is 7-zip. It's so close that it's almost within margin of error. 3D Mark Time Spy Extreme. The 13900K technically wins by like 3 points on the graphics score. On the CPU score, the 14900K wins. So, this is literally a 13900KS. Like, look at how the AMD, the 7950X3D, is literally right between the 13900K and the 13900K. Oh, I mean the 14900K. See, so it's like, it falls right in between them. So, it's one of those things where other than the memory controller, I can't justify buying this thing because it's so, like, look at this. Like, Far Cry 6, it loses to the 13900K in Far Cry 6. Now, the thing is, these FPS numbers are so close that it's almost like it's margin of error. So it's, I don't know. Like, right here, Horizon Zero Dawn at 1080p, it basically closes the gap between the 13900K and the 7950X3D. That's literally all that happens. So, what do we got here? We got overall performance. Overall performance versus the 13900K. If we hold the 13900K to 100%, the 14900K in compute. Now remember, the green bar means productivity. In productivity, it is an amazing 1.2% faster than the 13900K. That means this is basically a 13900KS. And then in 1080p gaming, it is 1% faster. And then in 4K gaming, it is actually negative 0.5% slower than the 13900K. And then if we look at how AMD does, the 7950X3D is still actually faster. The review that kind of made the most sense to me this time around was actually Gamers Nexus. I watched Gamers Nexus review last after watching like Paul's Hardware and a bunch of other ones and Der Bauer and those guys. And then when I got to Gamers Nexus, Gamers Nexus put on a whole show, like they did like a skit in the beginning. It was hilarious, but it was actually pretty funny. Hey Ray, so we're going to talk about CPUs. If you're just tuning in, we're going to talk about CPUs. We're going to talk about motherboards. And we're going to talk about memory. That's basically what this stream. We're going to talk a little bit about what's happening with graphics cards, because there is a export ban by the U.S. government in place on a certain list of countries. So NVIDIA is no longer allowed to sell or ship RTX 4090 and certain other SKUs to certain countries. We might talk about that. That might get a little bit political on this stream, so I may not go there. It depends on like how quickly we get through the CPU discussion. But let's just say there is a lot of bad stuff happening in the world right now. And this export ban by the U.S. government could potentially cause even more problems. It could just basically fan the flames because of everything else that's going on right now. But anyway, we may talk about that later in the stream. I don't normally cover that sort of subject matter, but it does pertain to the PC DIY market because it could impact the enthusiast space in a very negative way. So I think it might be worth discussing that later on. But anyway, so we're first going to talk about 14th generation, which is what we're talking about right now. So if you're tuning in, like I noticed Ray just joined a few minutes ago. So we're going over Intel's 14th gen launch. Then we're going to talk about AMD's upcoming Threadripper, because that is actually way more interesting than this. This was extremely underwhelming. Here are the results on the screen. You can see right there. There's not a whole lot to say. I mean, in terms of gaming, the reality is, if you have a really old CPU, a really old motherboard, like for example, let's say you're on an AMD FX Bulldozer or a Steamroller or a Pile Driver or Excavator, any of those old things, DDR3, or if you're on an Intel 4th generation or an Intel Sandy Bridge or an ancient Nehalem or some DDR3 based platform. If you're on such an old platform, you could consider the 14th generation, because it is so much faster than those old platforms that even if you're buying into a dead socket, because this is the very last CPU for this socket, next year Intel will launch a brand new platform, brand new socket, brand new CPU architecture, everything new. So I really think that next year, Intel will launch far more interesting products than what they have put out this week. So, but if you're someone who doesn't really care about that, and you have an ancient system that's 10 years old or older than that, then this could be a really good upgrade, because it is going to be miles ahead, a world of a difference in terms of performance compared to a 10-year-old PC. Just be aware that the power consumption is very high. Let me see if I can find the power consumption in here. Where is the power consumption? Here we go. So right here. So you can see full system power draw is at gaming in Cyberpunk. This 14900K system pulls 639 watts. And if you're playing Horizon Zero Dawn, which is a single-player game that doesn't use ray tracing in the same manner that Cyberpunk does, it pulls 581 watts. Now, I don't know about you, but that is going... So for me personally, I'm not too concerned about the electricity bill. Everyone who always talks about power consumption, they always talk about, oh, the electricity costs and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I get that. In some parts of the world, electricity is very expensive, and that is a valid metric to grade a product on in terms of energy efficiency for that reason. However, for me personally, the more pressing matter is going to be the amount of waste heat that is generated and dumped into my room. Because see, what you guys don't realize is that if you're live streaming for say 3 hours, 4 hours, you have the camera in front of, like I've got a camera in front of me right here. I have a light here, a light right in front of me. You can see the light. It's illuminating my hand. I have a light there. You guys can't see, but it's a very bright ring light. And I have a light over here, and I have a light over there, and I have another light on the side of the room casting an extra fill light. So I literally have 4 lights that generate heat in my room. On top of that, I have 3 monitors. One is 4K, HDR, and then I've got 2 other 1440p. They're going to be generating a little bit of heat too, because they're running at max 144 hertz. You know, with the brightness set to like 65%, so that I can see my screen while I have these blinding lights in front of me. So I have all this stuff in the room generating heat. Now, if I'm going to be live streaming playing a game, like for example, I did Lords of the Fallen recently, that is a very demanding game. It's UE5. If I'm gaming on it 4K resolution with a RTX 4090 or an AMD Radeon 7900 XTX, both of those GPUs are going to be pulling 350 watts at 4K resolution. So that's already 350 watts of waste heat from just the GPU. Now we add the CPU, because I'm doing the live stream. And the CPU is also going to be doing a lot of work for the game as well as the stream. So now you guys see why energy efficiency matters when it comes to these components. Because I told you, I have all these lights generating heat in my room. The last thing I need is for the CPU to be dumping another 300 watts into my room on top of the 350 from the GPU and the probably, 150 watts, 200 watts from all the lights. So do you understand why energy efficiency matters to content creators, especially people who are going to be live streaming? Because especially like a Twitch streamer, someone who's streaming like 8 hours a day or whatever, that's going to be very uncomfortable. They're going to have to run their air conditioner all the time to keep their room cool, so they're not like sweating and nasty and just feeling all musty and disgusting while they're streaming the whole time. You know what I'm saying? So that's the reason why this power consumption is actually a big deal, and this is the primary reason why I do not use an Intel CPU to live stream. A lot of people don't think about this. They're just, I want to play, Call of Duty or whatever. At high FPS, yeah, that's fine, whatever. The thing is, the X3D and the 13900K do just as good. You'll never notice the difference. So the only difference is that the AMD CPU doesn't heat up the room nearly as much as the Intel one. Take it from me, I've got one of these. I know how much heat it generates when I'm using it full load. I've got one of these. I know how much heat it generates in the room. It's not nearly as much. That's why I use it. And I have one of these for the same reason. So, to me, power consumption of a CPU does actually matter. But, I'm a content creator, and I don't represent the average user of these things. So I get that power consumption may not matter, but at the end of the day, it does matter, because the amount of heat in your room dictates how often you have to run your air conditioner. That's going to run up your power bill, in addition to the CPU just burning more power in general. On top of that, it's just less pleasant to be around a CPU that's essentially a space heater. So you got to pick one, to let the GPU use all the power or let the CPU use all the power. And if you do both, then you have a nuclear reactor and you're going to be sweaty and nasty all the time. When you're sitting next to your computer for like 4 or 5 hours. So anyway, that's a look at that. Let's kind of move to Tech Power-Ups review. I kind of want to get their conclusion. And if anybody has any questions at any time, just use the YouTube chat. Let's take a look at some of these gaming results. So at 1440p, with the stock setup, the 14900K is actually less than 1% faster than a 13900KS, and it is about 1% faster than a 13900K, and it is about 1% slower than a 7800X3D. So, you know, it kind of falls in line with margin of error at this point. So I don't know if there's a whole lot more for me to say about it. I want to talk about the platform, though. I'm more interested in Intel's platform more so than the CPU, because everybody has been saying that the CPU is nothing more than a copy paste of a 13900K with a new name on it. I mean, that's kind of true. I don't really think it's all true because there are some platform differences, and we're about to talk about that. So let's bring up Paint. Okay. So one of the things, let's talk about what the 14900K actually adds. So Wi-Fi 7. It adds Wi-Fi 7. It supposedly supports higher DDR5 speeds. But this is very vague. They don't really tell you what this actually means, because if you go and you look up the actual product on Intel's website, it basically says 5600 megahertz as the maximum supported speed, which is basically the exact same maximum speed that the Raptor Lake 13th gen supported. So if you go by that, then there actually isn't any difference. I'm guessing what this means is that it can probably hit 8,000 megahertz more reliably, because it was very hit or miss with Intel's previous CPU. So maybe that's what it means. But what I wish they could come out and say is whether or not they have better support for 4 sticks of memory, because 4 sticks of memory, to me, as someone who uses the PC for productivity, that means a whole lot more than, saying it arbitrarily supports higher DDR5 speeds, whatever that means. You know, like, what does that mean? Like, is it over 8,000? Is it 8,000? You know, it's so vague that this is basically a pointless metric, or a pointless thing to say about your product. But Wi-Fi 7, technically, this is actually pretty good, but the reality is, how many people out there are using routers in their home that actually do Wi-Fi 7? Basically nobody. I know. So, in that regard, it's kind of a wash, but I'm gonna give them the benefit of the doubt. It is always better to have newer standards rather than to not have them. Those who've been watching my content for a while, they know I have a saying: it's better to have something and not need it than to not have it when you actually need to use it. So I operate on that principle. So having Wi-Fi 7, even though I don't need to use Wi-Fi 7 today, it's still a good to have, or it's nice to have it. So other than the Wi-Fi 7, there's Z790 revision 2. I don't know what you call this. Depending on the motherboard brand, you've got like some people are calling it Z790 Max, some people are calling it Z790X. So they're calling it different things. Hey Nero, most people are on 7+ year old routers. Yeah. So, you know, like at best, most people have Wi-Fi 5, which is basically 802.11 AC. So there's very few people out there that are actually using Wi-Fi 6, you know, let alone Wi-Fi 6E. And Wi-Fi 7 isn't actually that different from Wi-Fi 6E. And 13th gen supported Wi-Fi 6E. So did AMD's AM5 motherboards. The problem is what happens when you... Actually, you know what? I'm going to move the chat back over here. I want to move you guys over here. So you guys are above me. Instead of, like, yeah, I'm going to put you guys up here. So it's easier for me to see the comments. The problem is what happens when you overclock the 14 versus an overclocked 13. The answer is nothing happens. Nothing happens. Do you know why? Because they're already, like, the problem with the Intel CPUs... So both AMD and Intel have very lackluster options when it comes to overclocking. So Intel, the difference between the two of them, Intel gives you better tools to overclock, but even then that's debatable because AMD has Ryzen Master, but not everybody likes to use Ryzen Master. I myself don't use Ryzen Master. So, but Intel does have extreme tuning utility, which is basically like Ryzen Master. So it's weird. Intel went from being the company that locked down overclocking unless you had a K-SKU CPU to now allowing you to have the best tooling to overclock. Now, the problem with Intel is that if you want to overclock Intel, your CPU is already maxed out. You're already pulling 300 to 350 watts of power. So think about that. You're talking about overclocking. You do realize that when you overclock a CPU, you increase the amount of power and voltage that it uses. This is how traditional overclocking works. And traditional overclocking is how you overclock Intel. It's not how you overclock AMD. AMD doesn't use what I call traditional CPU overclocking. AMD Ryzen CPUs overclock like NVIDIA GPUs. You apply NVIDIA GPU style techniques to overclocking an AMD Ryzen CPU, and that's how it works. When you want to overclock an Intel CPU, you overclock it like you overclocked a 10-year-old CPU. It's no different. The problem is that Intel's power consumption is so high right out of the box that your headroom to achieve better performance with an overclock is so small that it's insignificant. And Tech Power Up literally shows that. We have results right here. This is it. The green bar is the stock configuration. The blue bar is the unlimited power from the motherboard, which is basically the default for most motherboards. Most motherboards will give you the blue bar out of the box. So that results in a 0.1% increase over stock. The red bar is the overclocked settings. So what this shows is that overclocking the 14900K actually reduces your performance by 0.5%. Let me say that again. You overclock the CPU, you lose 0.5% performance in gaming. Why does this happen? Let's see if anybody knows. I see we've got 8 viewers. We've got 8 concurrent viewers. Someone probably knows the reason why you actually lose performance when you overclock the 14900K. Let's see. Let's see if anybody knows. I mean, I kind of gave you guys partially the answer earlier. So, does anyone want to take a guess? Thermal throttling. RK says thermal throttling. That is actually the correct answer. That's the correct answer. It thermally throttles. It instantly thermally throttles when you try to overclock it. Because it's a nuclear... Well, I'm not going to say nuclear reactor. That's an exaggeration. But obviously, it uses so much electricity that you cannot cool it with a Noctua NHD15. If you cannot cool this with a Noctua NHD15, then there is no reason to overclock it. Because you're going to start hurting your performance by overclocking. You're actually going to lose performance. So let's go and look now at the... Man, why do they do that? Anyway, let's look at the power consumption. Power consumption and efficiency. Okay, check this out. One thread uses 35 watts stock, 37 watts unlimited power, and 54 watts all-core for one thread. Now we look at the multi-thread, which is actually the real power consumption. So stock 282 watts, overclock 331 watts, And the realistic number for when you run this out of the box in an enthusiast class motherboard like a Z790 Aorus Master, for example, or an Asus Maximus Hero, you will be pulling 407 watts. 407 watts. This is the reason why overclocking results in thermal throttling. Now we're going to look at, let's look at, well, actually, hold on. Let's look at some of this stuff. So applications, you know, it's still using a lot of power. Remember what I said earlier, that it's basically a 13900KS? I mean, it basically is in terms of the power draw. Gaming tests. While gaming. Okay, see, gaming does not 100% load the CPU like productivity, but while gaming, it's using 145 watts on an enthusiast motherboard. If you buy a pre-build from Dell, it's going to be doing 144 watts, so 1 watt less. Green is a pre-built, blue is an actual build a PC yourself. That's what these results mean. And red is an overclock. Now, the reason why the red one is using less power is because either they're trying to do something with undervolting or it hits a thermal throttle point so the power drops off. So that's basically what that means. So here, what I want to show now is the temperature. So temperatures. Oh boy. Oh, I wasn't expecting to see this. I don't think I looked at this. Yeah, that's not good. So here we go. Oh man, that's not good. That's some burning. What are they using as the cooler? So at stock, from a pre-built from, although I don't really know if Dell would have those that good of a temperature, but basically stock unlimited power mode, which is basically your typical Asus Hero, your Gigabyte Aorus Master, your MSI Ace, all those motherboards are going to drive this thing to 118 degrees Celsius. This isn't a stock i3 cooler. Let's see what this is actually. This is on a, actually, they'll tell you here. Test setup. What do they use? They're using a 360 millimeter rad. They got a 360 millimeter rad. The cooler that they're using is an Arctic Liquid Freezer 2. No, I take that back. It's a 420 millimeter AIO. They're using a 420 millimeter AIO to cool this thing. So now let's go back. With a 400, hold up, what are we doing? Oh, load. 420 millimeter AIO, 118 degrees Celsius. 118 degrees Celsius on a typical, well, what I would consider an enthusiast class motherboard. The stock is basically if you enforce Intel's poor limits. Intel's poor limits will make it do 93.8 Celsius, but then it's not going to perform exactly the same as what you would get on like an Asus Maximus Hero. So that's to me, anything that's above boiling water is too hot. Like, I don't feel comfortable running silicon transistors above the boiling point of water. To me, that is asking for a reliability issue with the CPU's longevity. So I personally do not recommend running a CPU above boiling water. This is 212 degrees Fahrenheit, guys. George Foreman would be proud. I mean, I guess that's enough to cook an egg. You can fry an egg on this. 118 degrees Celsius. I don't know how I feel about that, though. I did not look at this ahead of time. So, but here's the thing. A Noctua NHD15 does 115. So, 160. How is an NHD15 beating a 420 millimeter AIO? I don't know. What? Do you guys see this? The D15 is 115.9 C. That means if I bought one of these right now, I would be getting 115.9 C. Because I would be cooling a 1400K with a Noctua NHD15. That's exactly what I would use because I don't use water. I refuse to use AIOs. I'll never, ever use an AIO for a consumer desktop CPU. It's air or nothing. So these are the temps that I would be getting. 100 degrees. Need a reactor heat exchanger for this thing. All right, but let's see. Let's see how it does when it's gaming. So when it's gaming, it's actually not too bad. 81 stock, 81C. So gaming is not terrible. That's still a little bit warm. But you know, like the thing that I always say for an i9 though, an i9 in my mind is meant for productivity. I would not buy an i9 for gaming. Actually, Wendell from Level 1 Techs, he had a really good hypothesis. He said in his review that he theorizes that if, trying to think what exactly he said. He said it's something along the lines of if somebody wanted to build a small form factor PC, they would probably get better performance with a 14700K because it uses less power, so it doesn't generate as much heat, so it's less likely to hit the thermal throttle points compared to the i9. So that's problematic if you can't really keep it cool like that by standard means. Because the thing is, people will probably be like an enthusiast might say, oh, well, you can always sand it down. You can lap it down. Yeah, but there goes your warranty. You're not going to be able to return something that looks like someone literally like lapped away the serial number and the name of the, you know what I'm saying? Like there's no warranty with that. So that's why I wouldn't do that. And you shouldn't have to do that. The fact that people have to resort to those sort of matters or like those sort of extremes to reduce the temperature, that to me says that there's something inherently wrong with the way the product is designed. Like if the product is instantly overheating, like constantly, well, under full load, that there's something's not right. You know what I mean? Like that's not a good product in my mind. And AMD is not really that much better here. Now AMD operates in a different manner. AMD will go to like 95C as the target for the non-X3D, because notice that the 7950X and the 700X are hitting like 96, basically 97 degrees. They hit that temperature because that's their target. Like I said earlier, Ryzen CPUs behave like NVIDIA GPUs. Ryzen and NVIDIA are almost like two sides of the same coin. Now, people are probably thinking like, wait, what? How is AMD CPU and NVIDIA GPU one and the same? They're the same because they behave, the way that their boost characteristics work is basically the same way. They basically target a certain temperature and they will boost until they hit that temperature. And if they cannot reach that temperature, so I'll give you guys an example. Now let's bring up Paint so we can talk about this from NVIDIA's point of view. So, or using a GPU to illustrate. Whoops, that's me. Where's my... Oh, there we go. Okay, so let's use the old GTX 1080 Ti as an... Actually, let's use the GTX 1080 because I know how this one behaves because this was the last NVIDIA GPU that I actually overclocked for a 24/7 overclock. I never bothered to overclock Ampere, aka 3090 or 3090 Ti and 3080 Ti. I never bothered to overclock those because they already, like I just said, they're like Intel's nuclear reactors. They both use a lot of power. The 3090 Ti uses 450 watts. Why would I overclock a GPU that already acts like a space heater at stock? You know, I don't want a nuclear reactor sitting right next to me because I'm not going to trade a space heater for a nuclear reactor. You know, so that's why I'm not going to overclock a 3090 Ti for everyday use. That to me is impractical. But a 1080, on the other hand, was energy efficient. This thing, stock, was 180 watts. So that's basically the TDP of the GTX 1080. Now, the GTX 1080 had a, let's say, a target temperature of 82 degrees Celsius. This is built into the VBIOS of the GTX 1080 Founders Edition. Now, this is also the target temperature for other AIB cards. AIB cards could use a different target temperature, or they could use the same target temperature. It all depends on how they designed their custom cooler and how they want their GPU to behave. But for the Founders Edition GTX 1080, the target temperature was 82 degrees Celsius. So what that means is the GPU will boost and boost and boost and keep going as fast as it can go until it hits 82 degrees Celsius. Once it hits 82 degrees Celsius, it levels off. You could almost say it thermal throttles, but NVIDIA would not consider that thermal throttling because that is what they call the target temperature. That's not like an overheating temperature. It could go up to like 100 Celsius, but then it's clearly going to be thermal throttling. And when it thermal throttles, it will drop below the base clock. When you reach for a target temperature, in this case 82 Celsius, the GTX 1080 will not reduce the clocks. It'll just level off. It will hit a clock at 82 Celsius and it will stay at that boost clock, and that is how it is designed to behave. Now, the Ryzen CPUs, like the 7950X, which has a TDP of 170 watts, behaves exactly the same. The difference is the target temperature with this generation is 95 Celsius. So just like the 1080, the Ryzen CPU will boost and boost and boost until it hits 95 degrees. And then it will level off, and that level off frequency is typically 5.5 gigahertz. 5.5 gigahertz is what it will go to at 95 Celsius. So that is not a thermal throttle. That's basically, that is the design specification. Thermal throttle is when you don't have proper contact, or you remove the CPU cooler, and you'll see the voltage drop, and you will see the frequency drop way below the base clock down to something like, like 2 gigahertz or lower, just to maintain the temperature at 95C. And then even then it will probably keep thermal throttling down. So that's thermal throttling. Running at 5.5 gigahertz at 95C is not thermal throttling. That's called hitting the target temperature. That's exactly what the GTX 1080 did. So that's why when I say Ryzen CPUs and NVIDIA GPUs are exactly the same, they are, because they operate on target temperature in terms of how their boost algorithm works. Now, if your cooling is so good, let's say you have let's say you're going on LN2. Let's go to the extreme. Let's talk about LN2, or you're running a chiller, or you're running dry ice, or some form of extreme overclocking. So if your cooling is so good that it becomes impossible for the Ryzen CPU to reach 95C, because it will continue to try to go faster and faster and faster, but because it cannot reach 95C because it's under LN2, it's literally impossible for the CPU to reach 95C. What will then become the limiting factor is going to be the vCore. The vCore and the current draw will then take over as the constraints that maintain the CPU's maximum speed. So it operates on a priority system. First, there's target temperature, then there's voltage and current, because if you're under LN2, obviously you're not going to be going to 95C, but the CPU cannot boost infinitely forever because it will be within the constraints of the V-core and the current draw. And in some hypothetical world where you have infinite voltage and infinite current, then the next constraint after that would then become the VRM. So just to put things into perspective for those that were curious how these CPUs operate. So going back to what Ray had mentioned earlier about, well, what about when you overclock it? Well, you can't really overclock a CPU if it's already pulling so much power that your cooling system cannot dissipate that heat. See, so you basically don't gain anything out of overclocking unless you're doing an extreme overclock using something like LN2 or dry ice or some sort of exotic way of testing the limits of the silicon. So anyway, that's the majority of what I wanted to talk about 14th gen. Unless anybody had any questions, we kind of went over the overclocking. I didn't really expect to talk about the overclocking myself. But next year, I think Intel will have a much more interesting year. Especially in the second half. The first half of 2024 will be pretty boring for Intel. There's not really going to be anything. They will refresh the laptops. But other than that, if you're thinking about CPU and you want to go Intel, then you're going to have to wait another year. Because you're doing yourself a disservice if you get one of these now. Because all the really interesting new technology, like we're talking tiles and chiplets on Intel, all that stuff is coming next year. So to me, 14th gen is basically a skip. Unless the memory, which I'm surprised nobody talked about the memory. Like, can you do 4 sticks of memory at 5600 on these? I don't know. No one tried. I'm kind of tempted to buy one of these just to test the memory. Like, can I do 128 gigabytes of memory at 5600 megahertz? If I can, great. If I can't, then this thing is an absolute waste of money and a complete waste of time. Because if you can't do that, then it's no different from the 13900K in my opinion. Meteor Lake didn't make the cut, so they didn't try. Well, Meteor Lake was never meant for a consumer desktop. It's going to be Arrow Lake. Arrow Lake is coming a year from now. So that's the one to look out for. So if you're wanting to look up like leaks and stuff, you're going to want to research Arrow Lake as a search, not Meteor Lake. Arrow Lake's coming to desktop. And the time frame for that launch should be either very, very late Q3 or Q4 of 2024. So basically a year from now. Arcade's like, screw the warranty, bust out the sandpaper. It was sad that you had to do that, though. You know what I'm saying? Like, you have to ruin the look of the CPU just to control the temperature. You remember the talks years ago about Meteor Lake? Well, that's because it kept getting delayed over and over again because of the node. It had a bunch of node problems. So overall, it's a very underwhelming launch. 14900K. The 14700K is the interesting one. And Intel always is kind of dumb when it comes to the review samples. Intel, this time around, just like last year, Intel provided the 14900K on the left here and the i5 14600K. Arguably the most boring and forgettable CPU of the entire lineup. They brought in a review sample for that CPU. Like, instead of the you know what's funny? They left out the one CPU in this lineup that is actually worth talking about. The i7 14700K. How are you going to send out review samples and then you completely ignore your iconic i7 for the review? How does that make any sense? You send the i5 that no one cares about, and you send the i9 that no one wants to buy because it's a space heater and it uses up too much power. You know, instead of sending the balanced one in the middle that actually has the classic i7 name, they send the two that no one really cares about. Obviously, enthusiasts like the i9, but you know, like the i7 basically performs exactly the same because both of them have 8 P cores, and the P cores is actually what matters. You know, like the 16 E cores versus the 12 E cores. You know, who cares? You know, but the one thing that's different about the i7 is the i7 actually has 12 E cores versus 8 E cores on the 13700K. So that one is the only one that actually would have looked pretty good on a gen over gen comparison, at least in multi-threading workloads. Yet they did not send those out for review. So very bizarre choice. You know, like if I were Intel, I would have sent the i7 and the i9. I would have like completely ignored the i5 because it's basically the same as the 13. Like you know what I'm saying. Like why did you send the i5? Where's the i7? That's the one that's actually worth talking about. Even more so than the i9. Because the i9 is basically a 13900KS. At least the i7 actually has something different hardware-wise. Like it actually has 4 more E-cores. We've never seen a 12 E-core CPU before, and then they don't send the review samples. So barely nobody reviewed it unless they went and got one separately. So very bizarre. But yeah, that's just that's an oversight for sure. So now I guess let's talk about Threadripper. So moving on to Threadripper. Ryzen Threadripper 7000 CPUs. I hate when they use the word launch. That you can't even buy these things until like a month from now. The world's fastest desktop workstation CPU up to 96 cores, 192 threads in Pro and DIY. So I like that they're bringing back the regular Threadripper, the non-Pro, because I basically ignored Threadripper 5000 because it was only available in the Pro SKU, which is insanely expensive. So they show, I think there's a slide that shows the price somewhere. But it's these aren't going to be cheap. Like these Threadripper CPUs, they're not going to be cheap. Even the 7960X is like $1,500, and that's like the cheapest one out of all of them, starting at $1,499. So this thing, the 7960X, is $100 less than an RTX 4090. So that's a bargain. Everything else, I think this one is like $2,500, and then this one's like, I don't even know, $5,000? Some insane amount of money for the 64 core. But these are the ones that everyone's going to talk about. People are going to largely ignore the Threadripper Pro because those are even more expensive. Although they do have a 12 core on the Pro, which I don't understand why they don't have that on the non-Pro. I guess they don't want to do the whole, like, Kaby Lake X fiasco that happened with Intel back in the day. You remember the talks? Oh, yeah. 14900K, 4,000... What's 4,000 W? Need 2,000 watt power supply with 4090. Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. So these Threadrippers are actually a lot more interesting because these have been gone for a long time, and they're finally making a return to form with the 7000 series. So it's kind of sad that Zen 3 didn't get a HEDT launch. But finally, it looks like AMD listened, and they're bringing it back. And they have like up to 96 core and 192 threads. So that's kind of insane. That's the Threadripper Pro. That's the flagship right there. But you can see, this is the layout of the standard non-Pro Threadripper. So they've got 8 dies here, which are the CCDs. So each of these are what? 8, up to 8 cores. So if you have 8 of these, 8 cores each, that is 64 cores. That's how you get the 7980X. 64 core, 128 threads. All of these will be available on November 21st. These are definitely the way to go if you're somebody who needs this for productivity. Like if you're going to be doing, let's say you want to edit 4K, 5K, 8K video, you're going to need one of these. If you want to scrub the timeline without it being choppy and laggy and stuttery, then you're going to need something with a lot of cores, because you need the cores to feed the GPU farm. Because if you're talking like DaVinci Resolve Studio, you're going to be using, typically like 2 graphics cards. You could use 1 graphics card, but you could also use more than 1 graphics card, is what I'm saying. And the Threadripper allows you to use multiple GPUs in the same computer while not sacrificing on PCIe bandwidth, because they provide the dual X16 PCIe Gen 5 lanes. You're thinking about the 7970X. That's the one that Wendell is also thinking about from Level 1 Techs. Wendell is aiming for the 7970X. If I actually get one of these, I'm probably going to aim for the cheapest one, the 7960X. Just because, I don't know, to me, 32 core, 64 thread, that is actually the way to go, to be honest. But it just, to me, it seems like it's a little bit too expensive. But the 24 core, 48 thread, that's going to be really good. Because here's the thing. All of these Threadripper CPUs have a TDP of 350 watts. So they basically use the same kind of power as the Intel 14900K. However, all of them have more true cores, because every single one of these cores are performance cores. There are no E cores. They're full performance cores. So when we say 24 cores, we're talking about 24 P cores, and all of them have SMT. So you get 48 threads. So each core is dual threaded. So you get 48 threads at the same power budget as the Intel 14900K. Because Intel 14900K, 300 watts, 350 watts, we just showed the power consumption numbers earlier. The thing to remember with Threadripper, though, is as the core count increases, the power consumption stays the same. That means that the 64 core, 128 thread is still only able to pull 350 watts. That means the power per core goes down as you increase the core count. So that is the reason why when you look at the boost, the maximum boost on the 64 core is 5.1 gigahertz versus 5.3 gigahertz on the SKUs that have less cores. So yeah, RK, I agree with you. I think the 7970X is going to be the overall best performer because it has the high boost clock, and it also has a very dense amount of cores and threads. But I still kind of think the 24 core, 48 thread in lightly threaded workloads, I expect that one to perform just as good, if not slightly better, because it has more power to devote per core, if that makes sense. And it only has slightly less cache. 160 megabytes for the 32 core versus 152 megabytes for the 24 core. That means that each core on the 24 core gets more cache per core. So you're getting more power per core and you're getting more cache per core. So I really think that if you're trying to build like a prosumer workstation, I kind of think the 24 core is probably going to be the one that most people go with because it's going to be the most affordable option. And it still gives you the full benefit of that TR, what is it, the TRX50 platform, which is far superior to anything that Ryzen or Intel Core has to offer today. So that's the core count on HEDT. There is WX, but you know, those are like insanely expensive. Let's see if we can find a let's see. Do they have pricing? No. Do I have to pull up Gamers Nexus or somebody? Like somebody had a... Let's see if Paul has it.
Fellow high-end desktop
Let's
enthusiasts,
watch Paul real quick.
We've been tricked, duped, hornswoggled.
All right, I just want to see
OEM pre-built systems with Pro Series CPUs from OEMs like
I want to
Dell,
see him
Lenovo,
show the prices.
Supermicro, or
Show me the
HP.
prices.
AMD has revealed 3 Threadripper non-Pro models, a 24-core 7960.
Okay, yeah, here we go. Here are the prices. See, this is what I mean. Look at the price of these things. The top-end SKU is $5,000. So anybody complaining about the 4090 being so expensive, they don't know what expensive hardware actually is. This is expensive hardware. The lowest end, the entry-level CPU is starting at $1499. That's the entry-level bottom line Threadripper. That's the baby Threadripper. The weakest Threadripper is $1,500. Think about that. That means the weakest Threadripper is the only Threadripper that costs less than a 4090. Every other Threadripper costs more than a 4090. And we have not even included the cost of the DDR5 memory, nor have we included the cost of the motherboard. This is just the CPU. And on top of that, this is the price for the consumer, the high-end desktop, the HEDT. This is not even the workstation. The workstation ones, they aren't even showing the price of that because they don't want people to get that sticker shock and scare them off yet. So you know, they're getting there. They're trying to psychologically get people excited by showing the prices for the regular Threadripper. They're omitting the price of the Threadripper Pro because those are the ones that are going to be like the really, really scary prices. With these prices, we're well into Apple territory here, guys. Like, this is Apple territory pricing. Like, with these type of numbers. So, let's see. Where's the... What's this? See, okay, here is the professional one. These are the professional Threadripper. So, the WX. The 96-core, 192 thread. They don't tell you the price. The 64-core, they don't tell you the price of any of them. There's a 32-core and a 24-core. Okay, so the only difference is the professional line has a 96-core. You can trade your car for the WX. Yeah, maybe, yeah. So, okay, they also show the Intel equivalents. The Intel equivalents are so I guess Intel has a 24-core. Intel has a W7 3455. And then the Intel has a 36-core labeled as a 3475. And then they have a 56-core. So the thing that's interesting here is Intel... I don't know how to buy the Intel because, like, I was talking about the last time we talked about high-end desktops was back in April or March, and we were talking about Intel's Sapphire Rapids. I don't know if anybody remembers that because I think people have largely forgotten about Sapphire Rapids at this point. But when I talked about Intel Sapphire Rapids, I was like, man, this is cool. I kind of want to get one, but then you couldn't buy one anywhere. Like Micro Center doesn't sell them, Newegg doesn't really sell them either. So I don't know where you go to buy these unless you buy a pre-build from Dell. But that's going to be a workstation. So that's not even going to be the ones down here. That's going to be the ones that are up here compared to the Threadripper Pro. And Intel tops out at a 56 core, where AMD has a 64 and a 96. So clearly the professionals that are doing like movie studio production work, they're most likely going to be going with Threadripper because that one has the thread count that they need while using the same amount of power. So, okay, here is another interesting slide. I don't know where these guys got all these slides because I've been looking for these slides and I couldn't find them. But the thing to note here is there are two chipsets from AMD that will launch alongside the Threadripper line. There's the WRX or the WRX 90, which is only for the Pro. So if you're not going with the Pro, you don't even bother with this motherboard. You pretend it doesn't exist. Then there is the HEDT platform, which is the TRX50. This is the one that's going to get all the hype and all the attention from the tech press and the tech tubers and anybody who's going to get a review sample. So these are the ones that have the quad channel memory. They have the 96. I don't know why it says 92/88. I don't know why there's two different numbers. That doesn't really tell me anything. And then I guess, yeah, I don't know what this is about. And then overclocking is enabled for both. Although I don't really know why anybody would want to overclock a Threadripper because it already has such high power draw, just like Intel, that they're probably going to end up thermal throttling it. And the interesting thing that's kind of weird is the TRX 50 supports the normal HEDT as well as the Pro. So if I move myself out of the way, you can see the Pro. Why am I not able to show it? Oh, here we go. There's my mouse. Pro and HEDT. So you can use the Pro series CPU on a TRX 50 motherboard. Now, I don't know who would do that, because if you're spending that much money on a CPU, you might as well buy the higher-end WRX 90 and go all out and get access to that 8-channel of memory. So that's going to be interesting. Kind of dumb question, but does these CPUs come with an iGPU? That is a really good question. I don't know. I would assume that they don't, but I could be wrong. Historically, Threadripper does not include an iGPU because it is derivative of the server lineup, which is the EPYC CPU, and those don't come with integrated GPUs because they don't need them. Because in a server environment, you'll use a KVM to access the server and boot it up autonomously, like with zero-touch provisioning or whatever. So with all of that, you don't actually need a GPU. But obviously, in the consumer space, that is different. You need a GPU. So, I don't know. Like, the thing about this is, if we go back here, if there's an integrated GPU, it would exist in the I/O die in the middle, because that's exactly how it works on Ryzen. Now, whether or not there is one, I don't know. I have no idea. I would assume there is no onboard graphics, though. But the cool thing about this is somewhere in here, I'm trying to see if he had a slide for this. No, that's just that. Yeah, the thing about this is the quad channel. So with Threadripper Pro, you get 8 channels. With TRX 50, you get 4 channels. That is double the number of memory lanes compared to what we get on the normal Ryzen and the Intel Core. So for those that don't know, Ryzen offers dual channels. So this has 2 channels of DDR5. Likewise, Intel also only offers 2 channels of DDR4 or 5. But Threadripper offers 4 channels. That's double the number of memory. That means that these motherboards, these TRX50 motherboards, will have the ability to socket 8 DIMMs. You can run up to 8 sticks of memory on these motherboards. And if you have a WRX 90, that means you're going to be able to run like 12 or 16 DIMMs. So a lot. Shadow said, yeah, I assume they wouldn't have one because Threadripper typically never had one back in the day, and anything that's derivative of server architecture doesn't need a GPU. So yeah. So there's your answer, Marcelo. There's no iGPU. I assume they wouldn't have one, but there's confirmation that they definitely don't have one. So, but these are going to be interesting. Assuming you can actually buy one, because Intel, you can't actually buy the Sapphire Rapids. I don't know where to buy Sapphire Rapids, but Micro Center, I know for a fact Micro Center has always carried Threadripper. So I assume they will have these at launch, and that means Newegg will also have them. Now, I don't know about Amazon, but I know Newegg should have them. You have the 7800X3D and Supreme 4090 running now. Okay, that's cool. Yeah, that is the complete opposite of this. That is a gaming first PC. This, what we're talking about, is totally not a gaming PC. I mean, you can play games on it, but it's like I don't think anyone can justify spending this much money on a computer just to play games when they could have just gotten like a X3D CPU. But you know, it'll be interesting to see if they launch like a Threadripper with Vcache, a Vcache Threadripper, because I know AMD has a they've got Epic in the data center with Vcache. So if they can bring one of those over as a Threadripper with Vcache, that would be pretty insane. And if they do that, I hope they just do all Vcache. Don't do that weird like mix. Don't make one of these. Don't do like a 7950X3D where it's like half of them are Vcache and half of them aren't. I'd like to see a Threadripper that has an option for all Vcache, because that would be insane. That would probably be very expensive though, because that's a lot of cache over a lot of cores. So especially if you have like a 64 core option, or maybe they don't even need to do that though. Like I honestly think like a Vcache 24 core Threadripper or a Vcache 32 core Threadripper would be really, really interesting to see. Because think about it. The amount of Vcache on a 32 core would be so much that certain old games would be able to fit the entire game in the cache. It would never have to go to memory. The whole game would just exist in the cache. Yeah, a lot of cache for a lot of cache. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but it is really nice to see these actually coming back. Well, I don't know where he got these. These are some really good slides. So, this is the difference between the workstation and the HEDT. So the high-end desktop has, it looks like P0 is, hold on, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4. So we've got, hold on. So okay. So if you look here, the memory sticks are, or the memory channels, I should say, are on the left and the right. So we have, wait a minute. So we have 8 channels? A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. So you got 8 channels of memory. Okay, so the difference you can see in the block diagram or the schematic. Well, let's just look at this. So on the left, the workstation part. So this is the really big, expensive one. This is the one that can do up to 96 cores. So you get 8 channels of memory. So you have A channel out here, then B channel, C, D. It's kind of weird how A and B are like the complete opposite ends. Usually B would be like where D is, but that's not how it is. So A, B, basically all 8 memory channels are enabled. You go look at HEDT, only 4 of the memory channels are enabled. So 4 of them are disabled. And then the other thing that's different is the SATA. Some of the SATA ports are disabled. Because it looks like P0 receive and transmit SATA, whatever that is. That's not turned on here. I'm not sure what that is. And then there's this other thing too, G0, G2. This looks like something to do with storage. So there's some stuff that's not enabled on the high-end desktop that is enabled. Oh, I guess the PCIe lanes. Some of the PCIe, yeah, so the P0, whatever those are, that's PCIe or SATA. Some of those are disabled, and P4 is disabled. So it looks like that's what's different. So obviously you're getting less cores, you're getting less memory channels, and you're getting less PCIe lanes. It looks like 48 lanes of PCI Gen 5. Which compared to the workstation seems like way, way less. Because it's less than half. Because the workstation is doing 128 lanes of PCIe 5. That is a lot of bandwidth. But to put things into perspective, the normal Ryzen platform, only has 24 lanes of PCI Gen 5. And those are all CPU connected lanes. So the Threadripper 7000 with 48 lanes, that's still twice as many PCIe Gen 5 lanes than the regular Ryzen desktop. So you're still getting way more connectivity in terms of PCI expansion. You're basically getting double. It's like twice the size or twice the amount of bandwidth available versus Ryzen. And Ryzen already had a little bit more lanes than Intel, so that puts Intel's platform even further behind. Although we shouldn't be comparing HEDT with consumer. So just to kind of throw that out there. We want to look at Sapphire Rapids. And as far as I know, Sapphire Rapids is... I don't think it's on here. I think it might actually be in Paul's video when he had that chart. Was it this one? Okay. Yeah, so Intel doesn't have a... It looks like Sapphire Rapids on Intel is only like the professional one, but that one has 112 lanes. So yeah, that one has more lanes than HEDT Threadripper. But remember, Intel doesn't have an HEDT. Intel really only has Workstation, which is going to compete with the WX. So 112 PCIe 5 versus 128 PCIe 5. You have up to 56 cores versus up to 96 cores. So you can clearly see AMD is the fast second in this battle here for the workstation market. Intel was the first mover this year because they came out with Sapphire Rapids. That was kind of a new architecture. You know, all the PCIe 5 because Zen 3 Threadripper did not have PCIe 5. So Intel was the first to market with PCIe 5 on the workstation market, and they got in first, but now AMD's coming in second, but they're coming in with more cores, more lanes, etc. So, you know, that's typical business 101. That's the fast second. So I don't really think anything's going to change here in terms of the way the professional market plays out. I think a lot of people are going to probably upgrade to Threadripper. Like Linus and those guys are probably gonna go to Threadripper WX, if I had to guess, because they're on Threadripper right now. I don't know what Steve from Gamers Nexus is gonna do. They were on Threadripper, but I don't really know what they're doing right now. They might just be using regular consumer, but I could be wrong. But yeah, these are the things that people actually use to do real content creation as a professional company, like as an actual career, not regular Ryzen or Intel Core. Although you could use Ryzen, you could use Intel Core, and it would be fine, but it's just not going to be as fast. Rendering's not going to be as fast. Can't use like multi GPU as easily. All that kind of stuff. Are you going to talk about the new laptop GPU with a cut down? We can. I wasn't planning on it. They want to do LN2 on the new Threadripper? Who is they? Who wants to do LN2 on the new Threadripper? You're talking about Gamers Nexus? I know they want to do it. Oh, Dell's coming out with a Threadripper workstation. Yeah, Dell's coming out though. They're coming back with their Precision line. Lenovo, for some reason, Lenovo had first dibs on Threadripper 5000, and then Dell eventually got one as well. They got access to them after a certain amount of months of exclusivity for Lenovo. But you know, Dell Precision's pretty good as a workstation. Like the thing that people don't realize, this hardware that we're looking at, this is typically what games are made with. Like game developers and content creators, and I'm not talking about like YouTube content creators, I'm talking about like real production, you know, Warner Brothers, you know, like the people who make movies in Hollywood. This Dell is the type of system that they're using. You know, because you're doing multi-GPU, you're doing Threadripper with multiple X16 PCIe lanes, fully electrical X16, no bottleneck, no like cut the bandwidth in half, none of that nonsense. No, full bandwidth, full everything, all the time, all the cores, all the power, all the performance. No compromise. That's basically what they're using. So this Dell Precision is going to be a hot seller, I guess, for a bunch of these movie studios, production, CAD work, all that kind of stuff. They're just going to be using these Dells, or the Lenovo equivalent, or the HP equivalent, assuming HP will get access to them. Okay, let me see if I can find the... generational performance. Just kind of show some numbers here. These are their own numbers, so take these with a grain of salt. Yeah, see, like these are the sort of things: V-Ray, AutoCAD, media entertainment, faster compositing, faster editing. So basically, your timeline's not going to lag when you're editing 8K footage and that sort of thing. Software and Sciences, Unreal Engine compile times, current compile times. See, so like I said earlier, actual game developers, they're developing the game on Threadripper and Xeon, and that's the reason why when a game launches on UE5, like Lords of the Fallen, and runs like complete garbage on almost every computer imaginable, clearly they didn't test these on like regular run-of-the-mill consumer desktop, because they made them on like super high-end expensive systems. Video cards, okay. The new AMD. Yeah, I think I saw something about that. Oh, there's a Roger Goodori article. We're going to talk about that later. Okay, we'll leave this one for last. Let's go look at the AMD. Here it is. Okay, AMD Radeon 7900M high-end Navi GPU, 4,608 cores, 16 gigabytes of memory, and a $2,800 laptop price tag. Now, honestly, that type of GPU in a sub $3,000 laptop is actually not that bad, considering how expensive gaming laptops are. That's actually not that bad. AMD squeezes most powerful graphics processor into a laptop. Yeah, that's okay. That's kind of like that's like a 7800. No, this is like that one that I kept saying that the 7800 XT should have been. It's kind of like the it's like the W7800, the professional card, except this one actually has 2 more compute units. This is 72 versus 70 compute units. Alienware has them for sale. So there's an option to get 4090 mobile, but the 4090 mobile only has 16 gigabytes. That's weird. A 7600M XT and a 7900M. Is this correct? Shouldn't that just say 7600M? There shouldn't be an XT there. That's wrong. That must be a mistype. All right, here's the Alienware. I want to see Framework get one of these. I want to see Framework build one of these laptops that has the 7800M. Because you'll be able to reuse that as a regular PC later on. Okay, here's AMD's own numbers. So this is against what? Or this is compared to the 4080 laptop. So it's on average 7% faster than RTX 4080, 33% more memory than RTX 4080. So wait, the 4080 only has like 12 gigs? The 4080 is a fake news? Cyberpunk 2077. 88 frames per second. See, the thing about laptops, though, this is cool to see. Finally, AMD has some kind of high-end laptop GPU, because they haven't had one in a long time. But to me, gaming laptops are synonymous with hearing loss, because the fans get so loud and obnoxious. So every time I see laptop gaming and then I see bar charts that show like 100 something frames per second, I immediately assume that the GPU or the laptop is horribly loud with the fan noise and just obnoxious and frankly unusable or impractical. So yeah, so no 9000 series Ryzen yet. That's next year. Why would it be 9,000? Shouldn't it be 8,000? We haven't even gotten to 8,000. Framework will more than likely have a card module later on. Yeah, maybe. Laptop 4080 equals cut down. I mean, yeah, it sounds like it if it's 12 gigabytes. So hold on a second. So a laptop 4080 somehow managed to keep the fake 4080 name when the desktop wasn't able to get away with it and had to be renamed the 4070 Ti. That's funny. That's funny. You guys could tell that I don't pay attention to mobile GPUs. Like, I clearly don't know anything about mobile GPUs because I assume that the laptops are obnoxiously loud and are horribly expensive and become outdated and irrelevant very, very quickly. So, you can tell I'm not a big fan of desktop or gaming laptops. Do I need a new motherboard if I want to go Threadripper? Yes. It is a completely... Okay, first, Threadripper is a completely different platform. It has nothing to do with Ryzen. They call it Ryzen Threadripper, but it is not... This is not a consumer-centric product. This is a product that is derived from the server enterprise market, and it is basically brought down upon the world for like regular people to be able to use. Think of it like if we're talking about Lord of the Rings, it's like the Valar have like gifted like elves some of their power, and that's basically the ability to use Threadripper. Otherwise, they'd be like, you know, the dwarves and the humans, and they're basically just regular Ryzen. You know what I'm saying? So something like that. So to answer your question, yes, this is a completely different product. It obviously the CPU is very large compared to the standard Ryzen, and it uses a completely different socket. So the chipset for Threadripper 7000 is there's two of them. There's the professional, which is WRX90, and there's consumer or prosumer, or what is also known as HEDT. HEDT stands for high-end desktop. This is a real high-end desktop. Ryzen 7950X is not a real high-end desktop. Neither is 13900K, 14900K, all that Intel stuff. None of these CPUs are actually high-end. If you thought these are high-end, you have been scammed. They're not high-end. Threadripper TRX 50 is actually true high-end. And Intel Sapphire Rapids is supposed to be high-end, but I don't know where you go to buy one. I don't know where to buy an Intel Sapphire Rapids system that's not like a workstation desktop. It's 8,000 since there's no mobile. Yeah. Well, no, hold on, RK. Do you really need different RAM? Oh, wait, I think you're right. Is Threadripper only compatible with RDIMM, or does UDIMM work? Does anybody know? That's a really good point. RK brought up something that I didn't even think about. So you can't use UDIMM with Threadripper? It says on the slide, overclockable RDIMM. So that means you can only run like ECC memory? Huh. No wonder developers use this stuff because their game won't instantly crash. If their game's unstable and they're running ECC now, unless it's like horrible spaghetti code that's just going to make it crash anyway with exception errors, but assuming the game can actually compile and run and they don't get like some kind of syntax error or exception thread error, whatever, like this stuff, RDIMM is the high-end RAM that will allow the program to be breakable, meaning you can pause during a run time and do a break and stuff without it like just doing weird stuff with the memory. So because it can correct for the errors. So that's actually okay. I didn't even think about that. That's a really good call out. I did not even think about UDIMM. So yeah, you'd have to get new RAM. Like the RAM that you have with Ryzen will not work with Threadripper. It's going to require, man, that means this is going to be an expensive product because you have to get RDIMM memory, and it has to be DDR5. You have to get a CPU that starts at $1,500 as the cheapest one. So right there, here are the prices. Is there a better slide? I thought there was a better slide that showed the price. This? No. That? I could have sworn there was a better slide that showed the prices. Not the one with the tiny font. Okay, yeah, this one. So, you have to buy RDIMM memory. You have to buy an expensive motherboard that's going to be at least $700, if not more. And then $1,500 is the cheapest Threadripper. That's a lot of money. Do they have better gaming benchmarks? They aren't even out in the market yet. We'll see how they perform. These aren't really supposed to be for gaming, though. These are more for, like, Yeah, like what Nero is saying. See, Nero has the correct assumption of, or not assumption, the correct understanding of what these Threadripper CPUs are for. This is true high end. This is true high end. This is not really meant for gaming. Now you can game on these just fine, and they're gonna be right up there with Zen 4 and Intel's Core i9s. But that's not what these are really meant for. Like I would not recommend somebody spend $2,500, let alone $1,500 on a CPU, then have to go buy RDIMM memory, which is probably going to be around like $400 for like 64 gigabytes or something. And then you're going to have to get, like, if you want to load up all 4 channels, you're going to need at least 4 sticks of memory. So that means you're going to have to buy either like a 4 kit of RAM, that's going to be expensive. And then I don't know what the speeds are going to be like on the RAM either. So, and you're going to need some kind of cooler, because this thing, 350 watts, you're going to need the same exact cooler that they use on the Intel. You can't use a Noctua D15 on this. Like, that Noctua 15, like, that caps out around 250 watts. This is 100 watts more. So this is going to require liquid cooling, or this is going to have to require some kind of really, really big, fancy air heatsink that almost looks like a GPU cooler. Yeah, so this would require like an entire new build. New RAM, which has the RDIMM, new CPU cooler, new CPU, new motherboard, and depending on who you are, you might need to get a new power supply as well. Because this thing, I don't know how the power spikes are going to be on this thing under full load. Noctua announced the cooler for TR. Oh, you're right. There was a article about that. Yeah, you're right. We have to go find it because I saw it earlier. Oh wait, hold on. I think it was under Tech Power Up had one. Here it is. Yeah, Noctua announces CPU coolers for new Threadripper and Epic. The thing is, these don't look... This must be misleading. This looks like a hamburger. It doesn't look like it's the right size. You know what I'm saying? Like, this looks small. It has a massive base plate. But I don't know. This, to me, does not look larger than a D15. This looks smaller than a D15. I don't know how this is going to be better at cooling Threadripper when a D15 is rated for about 250 watts. And this looks larger, but it looks worse because it's a single stack. This isn't a dual stack skyscraper. This is not a twin tower. This is a twin tower, but this thing doesn't have as much metal. This one has more metal, but it's only one skyscraper. I want a dual skyscraper. I don't do single stack air coolers. It has to be a dual. I don't know if these things are sufficient. Noctua NM TR5 SP6. Like, I don't know. I don't trust these. Would you trust these with 300? Would you trust this to cool a 14900K? Because if I don't trust it to cool a 14900K, I don't trust it to cool a Threadripper. Just straight up. Like, both Threadripper and Intel 14th Gen require the same type of cooler because they're both like 300 something watts at full load while doing video rendering. You know what I'm saying? Because that's what I would use this for. I'm not going to use this to play games. I'm going to use this to do video rendering and a bunch of other productivity stuff. Virtualization, VM, all that kind of stuff. This is perfect for that. But maybe the temperature wouldn't really matter if you're just running a bunch of VMs. Not even an iceberg piece could cool the 14900K. Yeah, it'll melt away in a matter of seconds. So yeah. But the way CPUs are getting with the power control, the power consumption is insane on all of these things. I don't know. You're happy with the Asus B650? We're talking about all this like insane expensive stuff. We're talking about like $1,500 CPUs and beyond, and then having to buy like expensive DDR5 B650 V650E. V650E for $106. You're happy that the 750 X3D runs only on the D15. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm running on. Well, I'm running an AK620 and outperforms of that in most games. Yeah, it's better. See, here's the thing. I want to say one more thing about 14900K. 14900K, it performs well, but it heats up your room and it uses a lot of power and it's hard to cool. All the stuff that I'm talking about with Threadripper, like I don't trust the Noctua cooling Threadripper. I don't trust Noctua to cool the Intel. So the fact is, like, I trust Noctua to cool the 7950X3D all day, any day. It'll work. So it's like I don't have to worry. But when it comes to these super 300 watt whatever, you know, now it's a completely different story. So winter is coming. Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, but then what do you do in the summer? You know what I'm saying? Like, you put Threadripper away and you pull out the X3D and then only have like half of the cores. You only run like half your cores in the summer and you get the whole thing in the winter. Like, is that how it's supposed to work? I'm doing something wrong with my computer that way? This is going to cool worse than yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, that Noctua doesn't seem adequate. Neither one of these seem adequate. I don't know who thought this was a good idea to cool a Threadripper with one of these. I could be wrong. Maybe the fact that they have such a massive base plate down here, maybe that's all that's needed. But I doubt it. Here where the average temperature is like 36 degrees Celsius, that is warm. The 1400K would be an actual life hazard. Yeah, 36C, man, that's warm. But yeah, you're entering summer. You're entering summer because you're in the southern hemisphere. You need Siberia or Alaska. You're getting 40C these days. Man, that's hot. You're getting negative 40C. See, so I guess you'd have to trade. Like where Met's at, you'd have to run Threadripper or Intel, and down there in the southern hemisphere, you'd have to run the X3D. But see, when I saw this, I was very disappointed. Like this, if it had two aluminum fin stacks on this, would probably be okay. But because it's only one, I just don't think this is good enough. And I'm someone who doesn't like to run liquid cooling, but I will run liquid cooling if I have no other choice. You know, like Gandalf said, I would not take the roads through Moria unless I had no other choice. I would not run an AIO unless I had no other choice. Now, Noctua was not really helping by putting out stuff like this and saying that this is okay to cool a Threadripper 350 watt TDP CPU. Because frankly, I don't trust them. Like that, this is the most sus looking CPU cooler for Threadripper I have seen. and trust me, I've seen a lot of CPU coolers. This thing looks like it could this could cool the AMD Ryzen X3D just fine. But like Threadripper, I wouldn't really trust this with Intel. If I don't trust it with Intel, I don't trust it with Threadripper. Still cooler than New Zealand. 5700X will run idle at 75 if I don't run the fans stuck on the Veto V5 you had from the 3600. Well, the fans should be running all the time though. Your CPU fans should never turn off. They should always, if you're on an air cooler, they should run all the time when the computer's on. It's not like GPUs, because the CPU, the thing is, unlike the GPU, if the GPU is not having to do much, then it doesn't need to run the fans because it's not really doing anything. But the CPU is always doing stuff. It's always doing Windows background tasks, interrupts. If you have the browser running, it's always doing something. Windows updates, blah, 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 all that stuff. So the fan on the CPU should always be running. Vibru V5 fans need to run high normally. Yeah. The 5700X runs at 40C at it. Yeah, see, that sounds correct. 40C idle, because that's, I mean, let me see what my CPU is running at right now. So my CPU, where is it? My CPU is running at 45. 45, it fluctuates between 45 and 47 on a Noctua NHD 15. And that is on a 7950X, not a 3D. This is the regular 7950X. This is the one that actually uses more power. So it's, you know, it's only running at like 47 degrees on an air cooler while running OBS. And the power draw right now is 63 watts. You'll get a better cooler later down the line. Need a new case as well. How is the weather where I live? So right now, let me see. Hold up. Let me see what's the temperature right now. Where I'm at, it's like 19 degrees. 19 degrees Celsius right now. So it's 19 outside. So this is actually the best time of the year where I'm at. So like Q4 for me is the best time of the year because it's not crazy hot and it's also not extremely cold yet. It does get cold where I live, but only in Q1. January, February, and March tend to be colder than like November and December. So where I live, I think of Q4 as the best time of the year because it's the holiday season. You got the Black Friday deals. The weather's nice. It's not super cold yet, but it can get cold, but it can also get really hot sometimes too. Sometimes, but at this time it's not really super hot anymore. But yeah, like January, February, March is usually when it's cold, and then the rest of the year, like from mid-April all the way to September, it's hot. So that's why I don't like doing live streams with a 300 watt CPU. So that remains to be seen. Like with Threadripper, I'm curious to know how well Threadripper performs in lightly threaded tasks like gaming, where it doesn't have to really push the CPU too much. Because if Threadripper actually ends up being relatively energy efficient in terms of downclocking enough where it doesn't use, where it's only like 150 watts, 170 watts on average to 200 watts average, that'll be fine. That would make for an excellent workstation desktop, or a high-end desktop, a true high-end desktop, I should say. Yeah, so like RK is saying, we just finished multiple 42 degrees Celsius days. Yeah. For those outside the US that don't know Fahrenheit, that's roughly 42. It's like 41 to 42 degrees. So yeah, we had a lot of days where it was like 41 outside, 40 degrees outside. But right now it's like 19, which is like really nice. That's like 67 Fahrenheit for those that are wondering what that is in Fahrenheit. Just played Spider-Man 2 for a while and it's good. Hope PC version comes out soon. You know that it's not going to come out soon. You know you're going to have to be waiting for a year. Yeah, I was thinking of getting Spider-Man 2, but I'm probably going to have to just end up waiting. Because I have too many other games. I've been playing a lot of Lords of the Fallen. I'm almost done with Lords of the Fallen. But it is such a fun game that I'm probably going to do like 3 different playthroughs just to see all 3 different endings. A lot of people were asking me when I was streaming Lords of the Fallen. I might do a Lords of the Fallen stream tomorrow or sometime on the weekend. They changed the game a lot, though. Like, when Lords of the Fallen launched, it had DLSS 3 frame gen, and it had the ability to toggle FSR 3. But then, literally the next day, after... So, they did the first patch. The first patch removed frame gen completely, so you don't have access to frame gen. So then I was stuck using FSR 2 or DLSS 2, but the game still was fine. Now you're just rendering the game at lower resolutions, and you don't get the frame gen anymore. But I was still able to do like 60 and then cap it at 60. But Lords, yeah, okay. I was waiting for someone to ask that, because that's what I was going to say. A lot of people kept asking me when I was streaming the game. Not a lot of people, but I did get... The question came up a couple of times. Which game did I like more between Lies of P and Lords of the Fallen? So Lies of P, I completed Lies of P. I got the true good ending on the first playthrough. So I've fought the final secret boss. I played through the entire game. So the only thing left for me to do in Lies of P is to either go into New Game Plus or just continue, leveling up or grinding levels or whatever. Lies of P is, in my mind, it's an 8 out of 10 to an 8.5 out of 10. So that's a pretty good game. That's like a 4 out of 10, roughly. So I didn't really have many... I had an issue with Lies of P in the beginning because I thought that the boss fights seemed significantly high, like the difficulty curve from exploring the world versus the boss fights themselves. There was too big of a gap, meaning you could largely steamroll your way through the entire level, except for certain elite enemies. Some of them were like really challenging, and there were some optional bosses, or mini bosses, I should say. They're not optional. You have to actually defeat these mini bosses to continue. But those were really challenging. But then some of the boss fights, though, were overtuned in terms of the difficulty. Because, and what I mean by that is you're going through the level and you're basically destroying all these enemies as you go through toward the boss. Then, so what that does is that creates a false sense of security where you feel like your character is really, really strong. But then when you go into the boss fight, you basically get destroyed so quickly because the boss, like, kills you in 2 hits. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's really weird. So they patched the game, and I would say without the patch, the game is like an 8 out of 10. But with the patch, it's more like an 8.5 out of 10. So it's a little bit better with the patch, because the patch essentially nerfed some of the health bars on some of the bosses. And they didn't really change the parry window, but the game also, it encourages you to play in a way that your average gamer or your average person who actually plays these type of games, they're not really going to want to play the game that way, and they kind of shoehorn you into playing with the perfect guarding mechanic. And if you don't like that, then you're probably not going to like the game that much. But it's... Overall, Lies of P, I think, is a really good Souls-like game. Probably one of the best ones that I've ever played. Now, speaking of Lords of the Fallen is a very hard game to run, first of all. So, like, actually, Tech Power Up did an article on Lords of the Fallen. Here. So, Lords of the Fallen, and just to show this, the VRAM usage for Lords of the Fallen is not anything crazy, but if you look at the 4K Ultra, 4K Ultra is basically requiring 8 gigabytes, or it's literally at the limit of 8 gigabytes of VRAM at 4K resolution. Now, at 1440, it's going over 6 gigabytes. So you basically need to have like a 4070, a 7800 XT, or something along those lines to be able to play the game in terms of the VRAM, not be anywhere close to the limit on the VRAM. Now, here's the thing though with Lords of the Fallen. Lords of the Fallen at 1080p, your typical 1080p graphics card is basically these GPUs. This is what I consider 1080p. So anything that's above this, let me see what's above that. 7700 XT. Okay, we can probably include that. Yeah, we'll probably include. I don't know about the 3070 Ti because that was not priced correctly as a 1080p. So we'll go up to the 7700 XT. Clearly, the game is very hard to run because a 7700 XT can't even hit 60 FPS at 1080p. It's only doing 54. The 3070, the 4060 Ti, the 2080 Ti, the 6800, the 6700 XT, all these GPUs, the Intel GPU just struggling at 37.8 FPS. So it's really, really hard to run. You know, the once mighty 5700 XT, which was kind of the AMD champion of 2019, that thing's only doing 32 FPS. So the game is super hard to run. We move up to 1440p. 1440p, there's literally only 5 GPUs that are able to go above 60 FPS in this game. The 4090, the 4080, the XTX, the 3090 Ti, they're the only ones. So literally the fastest 30 series GPU, the fastest AMD CPU or GPU, and the two like $1,200 and $1,600 NVIDIA GPUs are the only ones that can go above 60 FPS at 1440p. And that's not good because I consider 1440p kind of tops out around basically the GPUs that don't meet 60 FPS. See, so I consider the 7800 XT, the 7900 XT, and all the other NVIDIA GPUs in between, and all the other ones here on this list, I consider these 1440p GPUs, and none of them, with the one exception being the 4070 Ti, if you round 59.8 up to 60, it's trying to cross the line. So this game is really, really hard to run. We go up to 4K. 4K, native, nothing can do 60 FPS in this game. This is basically Immortals of Avium all over again. The only difference is now you have multiplayer. You have PvP and you have co-op in this game. So this is basically Immortals of Avium with multiplayer. And this is the experience. So it requires frame generation and or DLSS 2 or FSR 2. And at launch, it was fine because they had frame generation in the game. However, apparently a bunch of people were having issues with the game crashing, so they disabled frame generation because they thought that that is what was causing it. So currently, there's no frame generation in this game. So you can only rely on upscaling. So you can imagine how that typically doesn't help. I mean, it does help, but the visuals are not as good as they are at native. Because this game has a very gritty look. So when you turn upscaling on, some of that detail is kind of lost. It doesn't look the way it's supposed to, even with DLSS. So that's disappointing. You run with DLAA only. That's how I was running the game on day one. However, they turned off frame gen, so you can't use DLAA in the current version of Lords of the Fallen. Actually, I think you can. Yeah, you can, but you cannot get frame generation. So the DLAA won't help you. You're still going to be below 60 frames per second at 4K on the 4090. So it doesn't really help. But anyway, to answer the questions, going back to Lords of the Fallen versus Lies of P. So which one do I like more? So the answer, despite all the problems and all the performance issues, all the in-game bugs, because I've encountered some bugs with the game, and I've read some terrible stories about corrupted save files and all kinds of weird stuff with inventory getting messed up in Lords of the Fallen due to some kind of bugs with the game. So, but the thing is, the developers have literally put out a patch every single day. I have been playing Lords of the Fallen pretty much every day for almost a week now, and every single day there is a Steam update for Lords of the Fallen. So they are constantly patching the game. I really feel like this game probably should have launched early next year. I think this is too early based off of all the issues that exist with the game. But it's a fun game. So to answer the question, I really find this game more fun and more, even though it's sometimes frustrating, although Lies of P's boss fights, some of them are very frustrating, this game is actually more fun. I have had more fun playing Lords of the Fallen than I had playing Lies of P. And to top it off, I have had more fun with both of these games than I had with Wolong Fallen Dynasty. And what's weird is Wolong was made by Team Ninja, which is a veteran of making very challenging action games. They're the ones who made Ninja Gaiden and Neo 2, and those were excellent games. And then they made Wolong, and out of nowhere, you have a Korean developer, Neo is with Lies of P, and then now Hexworks with Lords of the Fallen, a European developer. And both of these came out of nowhere, and their games are far more enjoyable than Wolong. That isn't to say that Wolong's a bad game. Wolong's a pretty good game, but I just find myself having way more fun with these games, in particular Lords of the Fallen. I'd probably go so far as to say, despite all the issues that exist with Lords of the Fallen, now I actually haven't had any issues with crashing or anything like that. I've probably have had the most fun playing Lords of the Fallen out of all the games that I have played this year. Like, I've had more fun playing this than Hogwarts Legacy, than The Last of Us Part 1. Basically, any game that came out this year, this game, I've had more fun playing Lords of the Fallen than, like, any other game. So, that doesn't mean that I think this game will be Game of the Year. No, I don't think it's too rough around the edges to be considered for Game of the Year. Let's put it that way. But it is an ambitious game, and it is a very good game overall. So if I had to grade this game, I would give it an 8 out of 10, just like Lies of P. I had more fun playing it, but in terms of quality and the overall feel of the game, it's an 8 out of 10. On the first day, people with 13900K and 4090 were crashing, but I haven't crashed once. Yeah, I haven't. Yeah, same thing with me. So for those that remember, I did a live stream of Lords of the Fallen on launch day with a 7950X and a 7900 XTX, and I had no crashes whatsoever. Then later on in the evening, I did another live stream with a 7950 X3D and an RTX 4090 Founders Edition. And again, I had no crashing. And I did long, like 5-hour play sessions with both systems, and I had no stability issues. I had no crashing. The game ran perfectly fine, despite all these other problems that other people were having. I didn't experience any of that. So some of that, I wonder. That isn't to say that there wasn't an issue with the game, because the developers acknowledged multiple issues that could lead to a crash. But, maybe UE5 can show you if you have unstable memory or an unstable overclock or those sort of things. That could be the reason why people were crashing. You never know. So, that's pretty much all I had to say. So I guess to summarize, let's go back here. To summarize the Threadripper now, we don't need this. So how does Threadripper compare to Ryzen? Let's do Ryzen. Ryzen 7000 versus Threadripper. Okay, so Ryzen, 24 lanes of PCIe 5, 2-channel DDR5. What else? It has 12 plus 4. No, 12 lanes of PCIe 4. These are chipset lanes. So I guess I should specify these are CPU lanes. And then these are chipset. So this is X670, or I guess B650. Whatever, this is chipset. You guys get what I'm saying? These are chipset lanes, these are not CPU lanes. And what else is different? I think that's it. Oh, up to 16 core, 32 thread. So that's Ryzen Threadripper. Oh yeah, that's Ryzen 7000. Now Threadripper 7000. So this one, this is interesting because this one, depending on, okay, we're only going to talk about HEDT. We're gonna simplify this because if I include the workstation one, it's gonna make the Ryzen look like garbage. So this one has 48 lanes of PCIe 5 CPU. Now I don't know what they meant by 44. So it might only have 44 usable. I'm not sure, but I'm just going to assume 48. And then 4-channel DDR5 RDIMM. This is UDIMM. There's a difference. RDIMM is better. It's more expensive. And then you have... Now, I don't know how many lanes are on the chipset. This is the thing I don't know about this platform. TRX50 is a chipset. And then this one goes up to 96 core, 192 thread. So that's the difference. Intel 14th generation, do we need to include them? I don't really know. I don't really think we need to include them. It's basically 13th generation. Everybody should know about that by now. We didn't really talk about PC builds because we wanted to talk about mobile GPUs and Lies of P and Lords of the Fallen. But that's pretty much all I had for this stream. $92.88 total usable? Is that like including chipset lanes? Oh, you're right. You're right. It is. Why did I say 48 lanes then? Yeah, RK's right. So that means 48 are CPU and the rest are probably... Okay. Yeah, I think you're right. The total lanes... Okay, so 44 Uh, chipset lanes, I guess. There. I think that's correct. So that's how you distinguish the chipset lanes from the CPU lanes. Because the motherboard is not going to have the Gen 5 lanes through the motherboard, because that's going to drive up the cost even more. So it's most likely CPU lanes that are just running wires from the socket down to the X16 slots or whatever peripheral USB 4 controllers, whatever's on there, integrated into the motherboard. So it'll be interesting to break down these block diagrams for the Threadripper motherboards. So I'll probably be doing that. I looked at Intel's motherboards for Z790. They're not really any different in terms of the layout. They still have that issue where if you want to run Gen 5, you have to run your GPU at X8. There's no way around that because there's only 16 lanes of Gen 5 on Z790. So you're basically... It's not a true Gen 5 storage platform, if that makes sense. So as far as I'm concerned, Intel does have Gen 5, but it only has Gen 5 for the GPU and not the storage. Whereas AMD has PCIe 5 for both the GPU and the storage, without having any sort of compromise with lane sharing. Now, there are some AMD motherboards that do give you more Gen 5 drives at the expense of using lanes from the graphics card. So there is that, but by and large, most of them don't do that. That's kind of the exception rather than the rule. So yeah, the Threadripper is going to be interesting. It'll be interesting to see like how this thing actually performs and what the availability will actually be like. It's going to be really expensive, but it's definitely going to be something more interesting. It'll probably be one of the only things that will launch this year besides I guess the 4070 and the 7800 XT. Those were the only decent GPU launches this year as far as I'm concerned. Everything else was kind of a wash or disappointing. And then Threadripper is probably going to be the last thing that launches this year that is a enthusiastic thing worth getting hyped up for. So anyway, guys, that's probably going to be it for this stream. It's a relatively short one, but I think there's nothing else to talk about. So as always, if you're new to the channel, if you're just tuning in for the first time, I stream PC-related content like this, discussions on new product launches, upcoming products, maybe leaks or expectations for future products, every Thursday in this same format. So if you like this type of format and if you're interested in these type of PC DIY, so do-it-yourself, building PCs, that sort of thing, and from a lens of like gaming performance and just overall, you're a hardware enthusiast, feel free to subscribe to the channel so you can get notified on when I go live. And if you want to join the Discord, you can do that as well. If you want to like discuss with me or others in the channel about PC build advice, there's a lot of people in there that are really helpful. But as always, guys, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks.